Well, I looked at that row of cameras and I felt this big arm around my neck. This was one of those moments you never forget. And I said, no, Governor, I don't think so. Well, I was out of that office so fast, I never got back in that office in the 4 years that he served. And years later, he had fundraisers for my political opponents, for Joe Courtney, on 2 occasions. So I guess my decision made a lasting impression on him. But I felt it was an important decision. I felt that the state of Connecticut could downsize and streamline and make more efficient some of the services that it provides. And I continue to feel that that's the case. And when I went to Washington, D.C., I also felt that that was the case. And I made it a point of voting against the alternative minimum tax. I made it a point to vote against what I call death taxes. I don't call it an estate tax. I call it death taxes. Because death taxes take away from families, family businesses and family farmers, what they have worked their whole life to achieve. Death taxes are immoral because you get taxed on the first dollar you earn. You get taxed on the interest and dividends if you're lucky enough to put savings away or capital gains if you have equities. And then finally, on the day of your death, who comes in the house with the undertaker? But the IRS and the state of Connecticut. It's wrong. It does not target the truly wealthy. It targets the middle-class farmer, the middle-class business owner. It targets people like my family. It spent generations building up small family businesses and ultimately had to dispose of them because of the threat or the actuality of death taxes. Quite frankly, my family, my wife's family, has had a farm in Stonington since 1765, and with the passage of my mother-in-law some months ago, that farm in and of itself is at risk because of death taxes. In 2001 and 2003, I voted for the tax cuts, and I voted for what we called then a stimulus package. But this stimulus package that we voted for in 2001 and 2003 was not an allocation of resources from the private sector and from the Treasury and from your pocketbooks to large businesses. Included among those stimuluses were a $100,000 tax credit to small business to expense the purchases of new equipment to increase productivity and stimulate the economy simultaneously. If you look at the stimulus package that we're dealing with today, it is a huge allocation of resources. Virtually none of those resources come to small business, but it's the wrong-headed way to go about it in the first place. You stimulate the economy by lifting the burden of taxes and regulations, not by allocating massive amounts of money. I also supported from the very beginning the elimination of the marriage penalty tax. It makes no sense to me that 2 young people living separately and making a certain amount of money, let's say for sake of argument $30,000 each, should pay more taxes on $60,000 once they get married than they would filing separately at 30. That makes no sense to me. I don't understand that, and I oppose that. Why would somebody like Rob Simmons, who spent years in the U.S. Army, years in the CIA, fighting for freedom and for our values abroad, why would he be so concerned about the current situation that we face today? Well, it boils down to one very simple phrase that was used often by my boss, Senator Barry Goldwater, whom I served as staff director in Washington for 4 years. It boils down to freedom. Freedom. Something that we have that most people around the world simply do not have. Freedom and free enterprise. Free enterprise gives us the opportunity to achieve our economic dreams in a fair and open competition. And free enterprise, as Peter has pointed out, has brought more progress and quality to human beings than any other economic system known to man, but free enterprise has to be allowed to operate somewhat freely, somewhat without government interference, somewhat without government burdens and regulations. And when the government takes $5 out of my pocket, it takes away my freedom to buy a breakfast at McDonald's. When the government takes $5,000 out of my pocket, it takes away my freedom to buy a, second-hand car for me, or to start a small family business. But when it takes $5 trillion out of our pockets now and into the future, it takes away from our senior citizens the opportunity to retire in some comfort without their Social Security inflated so the dollars are worth nothing. And it takes away from our children the opportunity to live the lives that we have enjoyed and so many Americans have enjoyed, the lives of a free people, free to pursue their interests. I mentioned that I'm a candidate for Senate. And I mentioned that I have served in the military, the CIA, also in the U.S. Senate as business advocate and in the Connecticut General Assembly. And I'm proud of this service. And I've done my best during this service. I've not always made perfect decisions, but I've tried to make decisions that are best for my soldiers, for my assets and agents with the CIA, for my constituents as a member of the Connecticut General Assembly and as a member of Congress, and yes, for the business community as business advocate of the state of Connecticut. I've done my best. And I'm reminded of something that my late father used to say during grace on Sunday lunches at our home. He would bless the food. He would give thanks for the family, for the household, for the shelter. And then he would conclude by saying, let us all seek opportunities to be of service. Let us all seek opportunities to be of service. Well, I put myself forward as a candidate for the U.S. Senate because I am seeking an opportunity to be of service, to stand up for the freedom and the democracy that we enjoy, to fight for a better future for ourselves and our kids, to try my best to put America back on the path of freedom, free enterprise, and prosperity. Thank you all very much, and have a wonderful day.